My mother, husband, and son entered a televised trial to prove they could live my life better than I had. If any of them succeeded, I would be erased and forced to serve them while they collected $1 million. If they failed, they would die. Instead, all three volunteered. The life trial system had existed for 1 week, but no one had dared use it. Its offer sounded simple. If you believed someone had wasted their life, the system would place your consciousness into the same body, family, resources, and circumstances. Do better and you won. Fail, and the person you judged would receive $3 million while your life ended. Cameras turned toward me in the first row. The broadcast displayed my life in 3 neat statistics: low education, low income, and an estranged family. Beside them were the faces of the 3 people who knew how those results had been produced. Viewers could vote during the trial. Within minutes, most had selected erase her. They did not know me, but certainty sounded persuasive when it came from a mother, husband, and child. My mother, husband, and son sat behind me, avoiding my eyes. You all believe you could do better. My mother answered. First, I gave you the best education I could. I wanted a successful daughter, but you complained that studying was difficult and failed me. My husband said, any normal wife could manage a household and support her man better than I had. My son wrinkled his nose. People think she's my grandmother. Having her as a mom is embarrassing. The audience concluded that if my own family despised me, I must deserve it. My 3 judges began arguing over who would collect the reward. First, the system announced that if all 3 outperformed me, each would receive $1 million. Greed united them immediately. Do you have a rebuttal? The system asked. The crowd shouted that there was nothing I could say. Again, I replied, my mother took the first trial. Before the simulation began, she asked whether memories inside it would feel real. The system answered that hunger, fear, pain, and humiliation would be experienced, exactly as I had experienced them. She laughed and said hardship only made strong people stronger. My husband applauded. My son asked whether he could skip the boring childhood years. When his turn came, the audience treated the trial like entertainment, because none of them expected my life to contain anything more dangerous than bad decisions. She told the audience she had worked 3 jobs so I could study. According to her, writing with a pen was the easiest work in the world. If she had received my opportunities, she would have entered an elite university and earned $15,000 a month. Cheers followed. The system asked which parts of my life she would outperform: academics and filial duty. She declared honestly every part. Her body went still as the system extracted her consciousness. Giant screen displayed a baby girl with my exact appearance and abilities. The simulation labeled her Subject 1. She would experience my childhood, but my mother's own judgment and decisions would guide her. The first scene showed an unmarried woman begging in the street while dragging a little girl behind her. At 6, Subject 1 had never entered preschool. At 8, a stranger told my mother that public school was free. The child stood outside the gates, longing to enter. My mother slapped her. School costs money. Do you have any? Then stop dreaming. The audience shifted uneasily. This was the woman who had condemned me for wasting education. A kind donor later gave money for school. My mother clutched the cash, while accusing the donor of obtaining it dishonestly. Once she learned educated children attracted more support, she marched Subject 1 to the principal. The simulation did not hide the details she had forgotten. It showed the donor buying notebooks while I stood barefoot. It showed my mother selling 2 of the books and telling me I had misplaced them. It showed me copying lessons from a classmate because I was too afraid to admit what had happened. Each memory appeared with a number beside it. Money received, money spent on the child, days of school missed. Gap grew across the screen. She knelt during the flag ceremony, grabbed a teacher's trousers, and cried until the staff donated money. Then she told the child, I humiliated myself for you. Never forget what you owe me. Some viewers called it sacrifice. Others began to recognize the performance subject. One entered first grade at 8, 2 years behind everyone else. Teachers avoided her, classmates mocked her. But she earned a place in the county's advanced middle school class. She did it by borrowing textbooks after other children slept and copying pages before they were returned. When she placed first in a county exam, my mother took the certificate to donors and collected gifts. Subject 1 received none of them. The simulation asked whether the challenger wanted to alter that choice. My mother's own consciousness selected no. She believed deprivation would keep the child ambitious. The score projection on the screen dropped. My husband leaned toward me. If I knew your family was like this, I never would have married you. He spoke, as though my childhood were another defect I had hidden from him. During our marriage, he had enjoyed my silence, my ability to survive on almost nothing, and my habit of apologizing before asking for help. He had never wondered where those habits came from. The system would place him inside the life that had taught them to me. My son said my poverty embarrassed him. He had never asked why I saved leftovers or repaired clothes. Instead of replacing them, my husband called those habits cheap. Both had enjoyed the security created by a woman who learned in childhood that every resource might vanish tomorrow. Their trials would not begin with the comfortable home. They knew they would begin where I had begun. Don't worry, I told them. Your trials are coming. Middle school required books, boarding, and food. An older bachelor from a nearby village offered to pay the cost if Subject 1 married him after 3 years. My mother did not refuse until the original donor promised to arrange further support. Then her goal became Harvard or Stanford, not for the child's future, but because a brilliant poor student could attract larger donations. She trained Subject 1 to cry before teachers and wealthy parents. I become the villain, so you can be the hero, she said. All this is for you. Study hard. At the first parent meeting, she offered Subject 1 as a future child bride to the richest family in class, until they agreed to pay a monthly food allowance. By then, money arrived from 3 sources: the original donor, school assistants, and the wealthy parent. My mother told every source a different story. To the donor, she said the school charged impossible fees. To the school, she said the donor had stopped helping. To the wealthy parent, she said, we had no food at all. Subject 1 was ordered to repeat each lie. If her voice trembled, my mother pinched the skin beneath her sleeve where no one could see. Subject 1 was still hungry. If you look well-fed, people won't pity you, my mother explained. At 13, the girl had her first period. A teacher gave her 1 packet of sanitary pads. When it ran out, my mother handed her toilet paper. She studied while terrified of staining her chair. Boys called her a child bride. Girls whispered that her mother begged for money. Even so, her early grades remained above average. Then they began to fall. The audience grew angry. When she slept in class, she promised she would work hard. Why is she lazy? She's hungry, I said. Puberty demanded food her mother withheld. Malnutrition blurred her thoughts and kept her awake at night. A 10-watt bulb damaged her eyesight, but glasses were dismissed as a rich person's problem. Teachers refused to move her to the front because they were tired of my mother's schemes. When Subject 1 finally admitted she could not read the board, my mother accused her of inventing weakness to escape work. The teacher wrote a referral for an eye examination. My mother tore it up outside the gate. On the screen, the girl memorized the sound of lessons she could no longer see. Several audience members who had voted for my death changed their votes. When chemistry and physics began, Subject 1 fell behind. She had no tutor, no glasses, no friends willing to help, and not enough calories to remain awake. My husband started sweating. Does she have exactly the same academic ability Adeline had? The system answered, identical body, identical potential, identical external condition. Only the challenger's decisions differ. For the first time, the audience stopped discussing whether I deserved to die. The high school entrance examination arrived. My mother demanded a top score because she had already promised donors a success story. Subject 1 entered the examination hungry, unable to read the far side of the room, and terrified that failure would make her unworthy of food. Object 1 received her scores. They were lower than mine had been under the same conditions. My mother's smile disappeared. The system's voice filled the studio. Challenger Vivian Wood has failed to outperform Adeline Carey in the selected domain. Victory conditions have not been met. Restraints on my mother's chair locked. Termination procedure will now begin. My husband and son surged to their feet. Only then did they seem to remember that after my mother's judgment came theirs. The mechanical hum of the termination chamber did not sound like violence. It sounded like an office appliance finishing a cycle. A soft, pressurized hiss escaped the base of Vivian Wood's chair. Her body stiffened for 3 seconds, her jaw locking, her knuckles whitening against the synthetic leather armrests, and then her consciousness was unstitched from her neural pathways. There were no sparks, no screams, just the abrupt vacancy behind her eyes, followed by the limp sag of a torso drained of its resident soul. On the overhead monitor, her vital metrics flatlined into straight, amber bars. Challenger 1 terminated. Payout accrued. $3 million. A dead silence clamped down on the broadcast hall. The millions watching through their screens across the country had been waiting for a spectacle of righteous retribution, a daughter's vanity dismantled on live television. Instead, they had watched a woman slowly suffocate a child under the guise of maternal sacrifice, only to drown in the very shallow puddle of her own cruelty. My husband, Richard, stood frozen, his hand suspended above the backrest of his seat. His collar was damp with sweat. Beside him, our 16-year-old son, Leo, had turned the color of wet drywall. "Wait," Richard blurted out, his voice cracking against the studio acoustics. He looked toward the ceiling cameras, his charming, middle-management confidence fracturing into panic. "Wait a second. The calibration is wrong." Vivian, was 70 years old. Her cognitive agility was compromised. The system didn't account for age degradation. The life trial system's synthetic voice responded with a smooth, indifferent resonance of a cathedral organ. All challengers undergo full neural optimization before entry. Cognitive capacity is normalized to match the subject's peak biological baseline at each simulated age. Vivian would operated with complete mental clarity. Challenger 2, Richard Carey, please step into the primary pod. "No," Richard stammered, taking a step backward toward the audience barrier. "I withdraw. I'm canceling the challenge. Leo, let's go. We're leaving." He reached for our son's arm, but before his fingers could touch Leo's sleeve, 2 low-frequency security drones descended from the lighting rig, humming like angry hornets. Red targeting reticles painted clean circles over Richard's chest. Clause 4, Section B of the Life Trial Accord, the system recited pleasantly. Voluntary entry constitutes an irrevocable execution contract. Forfeiture, without trial, results in immediate summary termination and default payout to the subject. You may enter the pod voluntarily, or you may be placed inside. Post-mortem for automated consciousness recovery. Richard looked at me. For 13 years, he had looked at me only to note what was missing: dinner not hot enough, laundry not folded in thirds, gray hairs showing at my temples, money not stretching far enough. Now he looked at me with the raw, feral terror of an animal that had wandered into a slaughterhouse, thinking it was a buffet. "Adeline," he whispered, his lower lip trembling. "Tell them to stop. You're my wife. Tell them you forgive me. We can take the $3 million. We can go home." "I spent 12 years begging you to listen to me in that house, Richard," I said quietly, my hands resting calmly in my lap. "You told me women only talk when they want to complain. Now it's your turn to speak with your life." The platform beneath his chair engaged. The mechanical track pulled him forward, sealing him into the glass cylinder before he could scream a second time. The broadcast banner updated across the massive curved display. Challenger 2, Richard Carey, age 41. Target domain: marital competence, household management, socioeconomic uplift. Selected timeline: ages 20 to 32. Objective: demonstrate superior resourcefulness, spousal support, and lifestyle. Elevation: the chat scroll at the edge of the broadcast screen was moving slower now. The sneering comments had evaporated, replaced by nervous debates. User_8892, Vivian was crazy, but Richard is a grown man with a finance degree. He's going to ace the budgeting part. User_0144, yeah, Adeline was a housewife who worked part-time retail. How hard is it to manage a 2-bedroom apartment and keep a man happy? User_9331, watch him get rich in 3 years. She just had no ambition. The screen flickered, establishing the neural projection. Subject 2, occupying my 20-year-old body, opened her eyes in a damp basement-level bedsit on the eastern fringe of the city. The wallpaper was peeling in yellow curls. The radiator clanked with a rhythm like a dying heart. Richard was in my skin. His first conscious act was to sit up, look down at his small, calloused hands, and scoff. The internal audio feed piped his thoughts directly into the studio. Easy. She worked a cashier job at a discount grocery for $12 an hour because she had no drive. I'll enroll in evening business courses, get an entry-level analyst position within 6 months, and build an investment portfolio. The audience cheered. The studio commentators nodded in approval. A proactive mindset, the host observed. The challenger immediately targets career escalation. Richard, inside my 20-year-old frame, got out of bed. He immediately stumbled. A sharp gasp escaped his lips as his heel hit the linoleum floor. The system displayed a biometric diagnostics overlay. Chronic plantar fasciitis, grade 2. Iron deficiency anemia, hemoglobin 8.4 G/DL, lumbar strain from unassisted. Stockroom lifting. Richard hadn't known about the feat. He hadn't known that by age 20, after standing 12 hours a day on concrete floors without arch support since I was 15, every morning felt like stepping onto broken glass. He tried to walk it off with a masculine stride, but my smaller, depleted frame wobbled under the sudden exertion. His first stop was the mirror. He stared at my face, pale, hollowed under the cheekbones, dark circles bruised beneath the eyes from years of insomnia and low-calorie diets. First step, appearance optimization, Richard's mind dictated. Dress for the job you want. Professional attire, clean makeup, professional networking. He opened my closet. There were 2 pairs of faded denim trousers bought from a church donation bin. 3 identical synthetic polo shirts required by the grocery store, 1 winter coat with a broken zipper, and a pair of scuffed black work shoes with the soles wearing through to the cardboard insole. He searched the small plastic drawer where I kept my finances. Total liquid assets, 42.16. Upcoming obligations due in 4 days. Rent, $450. Utility share, $68. Bus pass, $55. Deficit, minus $530.84. Richard sneered internally. Just take out a microloan. Use credit to bridge the gap while interviewing. He marched subject to the nearest community bank to apply for a basic line of credit. The loan officer looked at my records. No cosigner, no assets, and intermittent. High school record ruined by Vivian's constant relocations and a part-time retail wage. The application was rejected in 4 minutes. You don't understand, Richard made my mouth say, his tone adopting the sharp, condescending cadence he used with customer service reps. I have a detailed business plan. If you extend a $5,000 line, my projected ROI. Nam, the loan officer interrupted, not even looking up from his computer. You make $600 a month. Your debt-to-income threshold doesn't qualify you for a secured toaster. Next in line, please. Richard left the bank trembling with an emotion he had never experienced as a 6'2" white-collar man. Total, invisible insignificance. He tried to go to a corporate hiring agency. Because he didn't have professional clothes, he wore the least damaged polo and trousers. The receptionist didn't even let him pass the lobby. We don't have janitorial openings today, dear, she said without glancing up from her manicured nails. Try the temp agency too. Blocks down. The crowd in the studio began to murmur. Fine, Richard decided, grinding my molars together. I'll work extra shifts at the store, a mass capital, and study at night. He took the night shift at the grocery depot. The simulation accelerated through his first week. Richard learned within 48 hours what my 20s had actually felt like. Lifting 40-pound crates of frozen poultry with an iron-deficient body did not build character. It caused severe postural vertigo. By 3 a.m., his vision sparkled with gray static. When he tried to read accounting textbooks under the bare bulb of his basement apartment at 7 a.m., his brain, starved of glucose and running on 4 hours of broken sleep, simply refused to retain the data. The words dissolved into meaningless ink. Then came the biological reality he had spent a lifetime dismissing. On day 12, my menstrual cycle began, an irregular, excruciatingly painful dysmenorrhea that I had never been able to afford to treat. Richard collapsed on the bathroom floor, clutching his abdomen as cold sweat drenched his collar. He tried to breathe through the cramps, his mind reeling in panic. What is this? Is the appendix ruptured? System. Run a diagnostic. Condition normal. The system's voice chimed callously. Somatic baseline. Matches subject's historical biological record. Severity. Standard. He had to work an 8-hour shift on his feet that afternoon. If he called in sick, he would lose the shift bonus and the rent check would bounce, triggering an eviction notice. The cameras caught every second of Richard, in my body, leaning against a shelf of canned tomatoes, tears of sheer physical agony leaking down his cheeks, biting his lip until it bled to keep from vomiting while customers barked at him about the price of eggs. In the studio, several male audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Why didn't she just take painkillers? A man in the third row muttered. A box of name-brand ibuprofen was $8. I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the ambient studio noise. $8 was 4 days of oatmeal. If you buy the pills, you don't eat on Thursday and Friday. The simulation jumped forward 2 years. Richard had failed to start a business. He had failed to secure a corporate job. He had managed only to survive, saving a meager $1,200 through brutal, soul-destroying self-denial. Then came the year he met himself. The screen shifted to a mid-tier restaurant where Subject 2 worked as a weekend waitress. A 26-year-old Richard Carey walked through the door, sharp-suited, boasting loudly to 2 colleagues about his minor commissions. At an insurance brokerage, his hair slicked back with expensive pomade. The studio audience leaned forward. This was the moment Richard had bragged about during our marriage. I saved you from the gutter. You were nothing until I gave you a home. On screen, Richard and Adeline's body watched the young Richard sit down. Young Richard was charming at first. He tipped 20%, asked for her name with a dazzling, practiced smile, and complimented her eyes. Subject 2, guided by Richard's own desperate desire to find an escape from poverty, accepted his invitation for dinner. Now, Richard thought, feeling a surge of triumph, I know how to handle this.
Man.
I'll make myself indispensable. I'll manage his household like a corporate executive, invest his surplus income, and build our joint empire. They married 6 months later. The reality of that marriage hit Richard like a concrete slab dropped from a highway overpass. Young Richard did not want a business partner. He did not want an intellectual equal. He wanted a domestic appliance that didn't make noise. The simulation meticulously rendered our first home a cramped, poorly insulated townhouse. Young Richard handed Subject 2 an allowance of $200 every 2 weeks for groceries, household supplies, and personal items, while keeping his remaining $3,200 salary in an individual account she could not access. Make it work, young Richard said on screen, tossing his dry cleaning on the
Sofa.
A good wife knows how to stretch a dollar. And stop buying the off-brand. A coffee. It tastes like dirt. Richard tried his brilliant financial strategies. He created color-coded spreadsheets, categorized domestic spending, and presented young Richard with an investment plan for their surplus income. Young Richard looked at the spreadsheets, laughed, and tossed them into the
recycling bin.
Look at you, playing accountant. Young Richard sneered, patting Subject 2 on the cheek with patronizing condescension. Honey, you dropped out of community college. Leave the money to the person who actually earns it.
Just make sure my
shirts are ironed before tomorrow morning's meeting. Richard's blood boiled inside my body. You arrogant, mediocre little clerk. Richard screamed in his head at his younger self. I built that portfolio.
I
know the tax codes better than you ever will. He tried to argue. He raised my voice, using the sharp, domineering tone he had used on me for years. Young Richard's face instantly darkened. Who do you think you're talking to? Young Richard said, stepping forward, using his height and shoulder width to corner Subject 2 against the kitchen sink. I work 50 hours a week to keep a roof over your head. You sit home all day watching daytime TV, and you want to lecture me on finance? If you don't like how I run this house, pack your bags and go back to your basement. Richard shrank back. For the first time in his existence, he felt the primal, paralyzing terror of being physically outmatched by someone in his own living room, someone whose financial permission was the only thing preventing him from freezing on the street. The screen tracked the next 5 years in brutal, agonizing detail. Richard tried to find part-time remote work. Young Richard complained that the typing was annoying and demanded dinner be on the table precisely at 6:30 p.m. Richard tried to save $50 a month from the grocery budget. Young Richard audited the receipts, noticed the missing surplus, accused her of hiding money or having an affair, and reduced the weekly allowance by 20% as
punishment.
Richard experienced the ceaseless, thankless labor that he had always classified as sitting at home, scrubbing grease from kitchen tile grout with a toothbrush because young Richard refused to buy specialized cleaner, mending young Richard's socks under a dim desk lamp while his wrists throbbed with early carpal tunnel syndrome, enduring the weekly visits from his own mother, who inspected the baseboards with white gloves and told Subject 2 she was lucky a handsome, hardworking boy like Richard had settled for damaged goods. The breaking point arrived in the 9th year of the simulated marriage. Young Richard made a disastrous speculation on a speculative crypto fund, a move the real Richard had made in 2018, losing $40,000 of our emergency reserves. In reality, I had quietly sold my mother's one remaining gold locket, taken a night cleaning job at a dental clinic, and kept the family afloat without ever mentioning his failure to our relatives to protect his fragile pride. Richard, inside my body, decided on a different tactic. He confronted young Richard directly, calling him an incompetent amateur and demanding control of the primary bank account. Young Richard did not apologize. He slapped subject 2 across the mouth, packed his suitcase, emptied the joint checking account, and moved into a hotel for 2 weeks, leaving her with an empty refrigerator, unpaid utilities, and a foreclosure warning pinned to the front door. Subject 2 sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by shut-off notices, with exactly $4.18 in her pocket and a body worn down to bone and sinew. Richard Carey's mental stability broke. "I can't," his thoughts wailed across the arena audio, stripped of all arrogance, reduced to a high-pitched, childlike sob. "The math doesn't work. The system is rigged. No matter what I do, he controls the air in the room. You can't win when you have no leverage. You can't build anything when someone else can tear it down with one word." On screen, Subject 2's vitality and resourcefulness score plummeted into the
red.
Evaluation criteria: domestic efficiency, socioeconomic elevation, relationship preservation. Subject score: 14/100. Baseline Adeline Carey score: 72/100. The system's cold announcement shattered the silence. Challenger Richard Carey has failed to outperform Adeline Carey in the selected domain. Resource yield was negative. Domestic stability collapsed 4 years earlier than the baseline record. Inside the glass pod in the real studio, Richard Carey's eyes snapped open. He began frantically hitting the tempered glass with his palms, his chest heaving, his face contorted in abject horror. Adeline, I didn't know." His voice was transmitted through the pod intercom, shrill and wet with tears. "I didn't know it was like that. I thought you were just lazy. I didn't know how heavy it was.
Please.
Tell them to cancel
It.
I'll give you everything. I'll sign the house over to you." "Adeline." The internal valves opened. The white mist enveloped his legs, rising swiftly to
His neck.
termination procedure initiated. Richard's hand slid down the glass, leaving 5 smeared streaks of condensation before his knees buckled and his body crumpled into an unmoving heap on the floor of the pod. Challenger 2 terminated. Payout accrued: $6 million. The studio was so quiet you could hear the electrical whine of the cooling fans.
In the broadcast cameras.
On the live viewer feed, the global vote had swung violently. Erase her: 1%. Acquit and compensate: 99%. I didn't look at the screen. I turned my head slowly toward the third chair. My 16-year-old son, Leo, was hyperventilating, his knees pulled up to his chest, his fingernails digging into his scalp as he stared at the 2 dead bodies flanking the stage. "Mom," Leo whimpered. It was the first time in 4 years he had called me Mom instead of the hag or Adeline. "Mom, please. Don't make me do it. I'm just a kid. You're my mother. Mothers are supposed to protect their kids. You can't let them kill me." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was wearing the $300 sneakers I had skipped dental work to buy him for his 16th birthday because he had screamed that the other boys at his private academy were laughing at his discount shoes. He had on the designer jacket his father bought him with money stolen from our utility fund. His skin was smooth, his posture careless, his teeth straight and white from braces that had cost me 3 years of weekend janitorial shifts. "When you signed the form this morning, Leo," I said, my voice steady, devoid of anger, "what did you tell the host?" Leo squeezed his eyes shut, tears leaking through his lashes. He had looked directly into the camera and said, "She's an embarrassment.
She
looks like a walking corpse. She wears clothes from 5 years ago and she never does anything cool. If I had her life, I'd at least have some self-respect. The system doesn't accept withdrawals from minors who entered with parental consent, Leo." I told him gently. "Your father signed your authorization form because he wanted your $1 million share added to his trust." Challenger 3, Leo Carey, the system intoned. "Please prepare for neural transference."
No. Help me."
Leo shrieked as the mechanical arms smoothly descended from his chair, securing his wrists and ankles with padded hydraulic clamps.
Mom.
"Mom, do something." "I did do something, Leo. I whispered as the glass visor lowered over his forehead. I kept you alive for 16 years at the cost of my own flesh.
Now.
You're going to see what that meat tasted like. Part 4. The Architecture of Motherhood. Challenger 3. Leo Carey. Age 16. Target domain: maternal resilience, parental sacrifice, child preservation. Selected timeline: ages 24 to 40. Objective: raise a child to adolescence with higher socioeconomic health, better emotional bonding, and superior self-preservation. The screen transitioned into darkness, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizing sound of a human lung fighting for air. The simulation began at 4:15 a.m. in a crowded public hospital ward. Leo Carey was placed inside my 25-year-old body during the 36th hour of unmedicated labor. A scream ripped from Subject 3's throat that shook the studio speakers. It was not a psychological pain. It was the raw, tearing reality of a pelvic girdle being forced apart by a 9-pound infant while an overworked resident doctor barked orders at a nurse who hadn't slept in 20 hours. What is happening? Leo's thoughts echoed across the hall in absolute delirium. Make it stop. Give me drugs. Turn off the pain. Epidural request denied. The historical record displayed on screen. Patient uninsured for specialized anesthesia. Standard county hospital protocol. Applied. 4 simulated hours, Leo experienced the physical destruction of my body. Giving birth to him. The tearing of tissue, the hemorrhage that nearly stopped. My heart, the ice-cold saline pumped into veins that felt like fire, and, finally, the exhaustion so deep that breathing felt like lifting an anvil. And then, they placed the baby on his chest. The baby was him. A red, screaming, helpless version of Leo Carey, covered in fluid, entirely dependent on the broken body beneath it for its next second of survival. Leo, inside my exhausted body, didn't feel maternal love. He felt only revulsion and panic. Get it off me. I need to rest. I need to go to sleep. He tried to sleep. The simulation did not allow it. Every 2 hours, the baby screamed. Its stomach was the size of a walnut. Its cries were sharp, relentless needles puncturing the brain's frontal lobe.
When
Subject 3 tried to feed the infant, Leo experienced the exquisite torture of cracked, bleeding nipples, mastitis that spiked a fever of 103 degrees, and the suffocating terror of a baby that wouldn't latch. The simulation accelerated through the infant years. Leo thought being a mother was sitting in a rocking chair holding a cute baby. He discovered the sensory nightmare. The constant, sour smell of regurgitated milk dried into the collar of the only clean shirt you owned. The perpetual sleep deprivation, never achieving more than 90 consecutive minutes of REM sleep for 4 straight years, which reduced his cognitive ability to that of a drunk person. The isolation. Friends stopped calling because she couldn't afford coffee and had nothing to talk about except diaper rash and the price of generic infant formula. And then, young Richard returned from work every evening. Young Richard didn't hold the baby. I worked 8 hours, Adeline.
take him
Into the other room. His crying is giving me a headache. Leo in Adeline's body wanted to scream at Richard, wanted to demand help, wanted to walk out the front door and go to an arcade, a cinema, anywhere. He tried to leave the apartment once, leaving the baby in the crib. He made it 3 blocks before the biological tether, a primal, chemical surge of oxytocin, cortisol, and terror, dragged Subject 3 back up the stairs on trembling knees, sobbing uncontrollably, terrified the baby had choked on its own saliva in his absence. You see, Leo? I said from my chair in the real studio, my voice carrying over the monitors. You can't walk away. A man can walk away, and he's just an absent father. If a woman walks away, she is a monster. And your own biology punishes you more than any court ever could. The simulation jumped to when Leo was 8 years old. The screen showed a small, rundown kitchen. Subject 3 had prepared a single pork chop, the only meat purchase for the week, and a bowl of boiled cabbage. Subject 3 sat down. Leo inside my body was starving. He hadn't eaten since 6 a.m., having survived on toast crusts left over from breakfast.
He
Picked up the fork to eat the pork chop. 8-year-old Leo walked into the kitchen, dropped his school bag on the floor, and scowled. I'm hungry, child Leo whined. Is that all there is? Pork again? I wanted
pizza
Tyler's mom orders pizza every night. Subject 3's hand hesitated. Richard's conditioning told him, eat the meat. You need the protein. Tell the brat to eat cabbage. Subject 3 kept the fork. Child Leo immediately threw a violent tantrum, kicking the kitchen cabinet and knocking the bowl of cabbage onto the floor. I hate you. You're the worst mom ever. You never buy anything good. I wish Tyler's mom was my mom. Leo in Adeline's body watched his younger self with mounting horror. He recognized that face. He recognized that voice. He had used that exact tone, those exact words, dozens of times. Subject 3 tried to hold out, but the system calculated the mother's emotional baseline, guilt level, 94%. The crushing, irrational conviction that your child's misery is your personal moral failing. Trembling, Subject 3 cut the pork chop into small, neat bites, put it on a clean plate, and handed it to Child Leo. Child Leo took the plate, didn't say thank you, ate half the meat, mashed the rest with his fork into an unpalatable paste, and left the table to play video
Games.
Subject 3 stood by the sink, picked up the cold, mangled scraps of meat left behind on the child's plate, and ate them with her bare fingers over the trash. So she wouldn't have to wash another dish. Inside the trial pod, 16-year-old Leo began to weep with such violence that his chest hitched against the restraints. Stop, Leo's mind begged. Please stop. I didn't mean it. I was just a kid. The simulation did not stop. It jumped to age 14. The parent-teacher conference. Subject 3 arrived wearing an 8-year-old wool coat with frayed cuffs, her face lined with premature wrinkles, her hair graying at the temples because hair dye was an unjustifiable $15 luxury. 14-year-old Leo stood near the lockers with 3 wealthy classmates. When Subject 3 walked past and smiled at him, 14-year-old Leo looked through her as if she were a ghost, turned to his friends, and laughed loudly. Look at that old hag. Probably looking for empty bottles in the recycling bins. The classmates laughed. Subject 3 didn't stop. She didn't yell. She kept her head down, walked into the classroom, sat in the small plastic chair, and listened to the teacher explain that Leo was failing history because he spent class playing games on his smartphone. When Subject 3 asked why he didn't study, young Leo screamed at her in the car on the way home. Why should I study? So I can end up a loser like you?
Look
at you. You disgust me. Every time you come to my school, everyone makes fun of me. Subject 3 drove in silence. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Her teeth were decaying from calcium depletion during pregnancy that had never been professionally restored. Her back burned with sciatica from 16 years of carrying groceries, laundry baskets, and the emotional wreckage of that household. She said only one thing. Did you eat lunch today? Shut up, young Leo yelled, slamming his hand against the dashboard. In the studio, Leo Carey broke completely. I'm sorry. His voice blasted through the speakers, cracking and raw.
Mom, I'm
sorry. I didn't see. I only saw that you were old. I didn't know you got old. Because of me.
Mom,
please let me out. I'll eat the cabbage. Mom, I'll eat the cabbage. The system's algorithm ran the comparative analysis. Evaluation criteria: maternal preservation, retention of domestic harmony, emotional continuity. Challenger stability collapsed at simulated age 33. Failure to maintain household survival. Challenger abandoned post-stirring. Child's 14th year. Challenger 3. Leo Carey has failed to outperform Adeline Carey in the selected domain. Mom, Leo screamed, his eyes rolling back in terror as the pod's internal mechanisms engaged. Mom. I stood up from my chair in the front row. I walked slowly across the platform, past the dead shell of Vivian Wood, past the fogged glass that held the corpse of Richard Carey, until I stood directly in front of my son's pod. He looked at me through the glass, his face wet with snot and tears, his hands clawing at the transparent barrier. I spent 16 years shielding you from the cost of your own life, Leo. I said softly, loud enough for the microphone at my collar to catch every syllable. You thought the world was easy because I absorbed everything that was hard. You thought I was weak because you never saw the blows I took to keep you upright. Mom, please, he choked out. A debt that is never acknowledged cannot be forgiven, Leo, I whispered. You wanted to live my life. Now you have to finish it. The white mist hissed from the ceiling of the pod. Leo's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to make one last sound, but the neural override struck instantly. His hands went limp, dropping from the glass, and his body relaxed into the deep, unbothered slumber of someone who would never have To worry about tomorrow's rent again. Challenger 3 terminated. Total payout accrued $9 million. The broadcast studio was filled with 900 people, and not a single one was breathing loudly enough to be heard. The host, a man who had made a lucrative career out of televised human misery, stood behind his podium with his cue cards trembling in his hand.
His
teleprompter was scrolling frantically with instructions from executive producers who had just witnessed their highest-rated broadcast turn into an absolute moral execution ground. The trial has concluded, the host said, his voice unsteady, looking at me as if I were made of industrial explosives. Subject Adeline Carey,
by
unanimous systemic verification, has defended her life record across all contested parameters. The reward of $9 million has been cleared by the central repository and transferred to your primary account. The restraints on my wrists and waist had long since unlocked. I stood in the center of the illuminated circle. The 3 glass cylinders behind me stood like transparent sarcophagi, each containing the biological remains of the people who had claimed they could do better. On the giant overhead screens, the statistics of my life still hung in crisp, clinical fonts. Low education, low income, estranged family. Beside them, the system had added a new line. Survival efficiency, 99.8th percentile. Exploitation index, maximum recordable value. Do you? The host swallowed hard, glancing at the camera red light.
Do you
have any final words for the viewers at home? Over 80 million households watched this trial today. I looked up at the lens of the primary camera, the little glass eye that connected me to 80 million living rooms, 80 million kitchens, 80 million people who had spent their evening eating snacks while voting for my execution. When you look at a woman who is tired, I said, my voice calm, level, and entirely devoid of theatrical grief. When you look at her worn-out shoes, her bad posture, her silence, and her lack of ambition, remember what you saw
today.
I took a breath, a full, unobstructed breath that filled lungs that felt lighter than they had since I was 7 years old. She is not weak, I told them. She is just the foundation you built your
comfort on.
And foundations are always buried in the dirt. I didn't wait for the host to close the broadcast. I turned my back on the cameras, on the dead, and on the machine that had priced my agony at $3 million a corpse. I walked down the steps of the stage, past the rows of spectators who pulled their legs back in superstitious terror as if my shadow might touch them, and pushed open the heavy double doors leading to the exterior concourse. Outside, the night air was cold, crisp, and completely free. There was no one waiting for me in the parking lot. No mother demanding money for donations she had stolen. No husband complaining that the car had been parked too far from the entrance. No son sneering at the brand of my coat. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small, cracked plastic phone I had used for 7 years, and dropped it into a municipal recycling bin near the curb. The city lights stretched out before me, millions of glowing windows, millions of homes, millions of small, invisible wars being fought behind closed doors by people whose names would never appear on a screen. I put my hands in my pockets, adjusted the collar of my worn jacket against the wind, and began to walk. For the first time in 40 years, every single step I took belonged entirely to
me.